Welcome everyone, my name is Jordan Farmer. This is the Uncommon Ground YouTube channel where we are indoctrinating the masses. And today I'm just going to be talking about my time as a Bernie bro and my journey to and away from Bernie Sanders as a supporter. The story starts in 2015. At that point I was a open-minded libertarian, but very much a libertarian. I wasn't about the two main parties. Very much was about freedom and really valued economic freedom because I think it works more than anything. It delivers the most in the long run for the most people. Anyways, so I was an unlikely candidate to be a Bernie Sanders supporter at that point. As a libertarian, very, very much not a socialist. But a very progressive friend of mine suggested the interview between Stephen Colbert and Bernie Sanders in 2015, and I checked it out. And what struck me about him was two main things. One, he seemed like a good dude who genuinely cared about the people, and he was willing to think outside the box. His term democratic socialist and sort of his view of the Nordic countries and having a social safety net and stuff. His particular views broke a lot of traditional categories that I had in my head and that I believed were... anyways, it made him interesting, and it also allowed me to explore new political territory. So I started watching more and more of him, and then the primaries started to get heated up. I did not spend any time at all, really, except for retroactively after the fact. I didn't spend any time in the Republican primaries as they were going on. I followed some of it, but for the most part I was unplugged because I checked out the field and I very quickly realized that it was Trump versus a bunch of nerds, for lack of a better way to say it. A bunch of very uncharismatic, very much more calm and controlled, but also maybe flusterable men. So I knew Republicans well enough to know that Trump versus a bunch of nerds, Trump's going to get the nomination. I don't even really need to waste a whole lot of time watching this and keeping up with all these debates. And there was a mixture of substance and lack of substance, and interesting moments and boring moments throughout those debates. But anyways, I spent most of my time searching the Democrat side, trying to explore those ideas and trying to learn about Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders, because they were the main two. There was that one military general dude. He didn't go anywhere, and most people were out of the field that year, except for Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton. And over the course of the primaries, Bernie earned a lot of credit with me because he was willing to point out the fact that Hillary Clinton was taking $250,000 speech fees from big banks, and clearly that is a conflict of interest. It's a legal loophole to gain influence over our politicians. And she was, I mean, that's about as caught with your hand in the cookie jar as you get. You know, literally the banks. I mean, the big banksters, like the big boys. She's the favorite of the big boys. So over the course of the primaries, you know, there's a lot of other stories and more details, and there's lots and lots of history to Sanders and to Clinton. But once it was over, it was very clear that not only was she corrupt, and not only did she have a lot of influence in the Democrat establishment, but I saw in the moment, and then later on reports and investigations showed that there was extreme bias towards Hillary Clinton and against Bernie Sanders from within the Democrat Party. We saw it again in 2020. It's not something they decided to start hiding. It's something that they decided to double down on. And to double down on, well, you see this crazy guy over here who's kind of an outsider and who has different kinds of ideas. He's dangerous, so we got to lock him out. Against the people's will. They worked against the people's will by manipulating it at all. One of the examples in the moment was, I believe it was an Iowa delegate ceremony, or whatever it would be called. And instead of having some sort of vote or some sort of formal process, they basically stood in front of a crowd that was there and said, all right, yell if you want Sanders. A bunch of people yelled, about 2/3. Yell if you want Clinton. About 1/3. and then they gave it to Clinton. It was a stupid, insane process, and on camera, they still just, said screw you to the system and just said, we're going to pick who we want. When I saw that, it made me realize that, and I realized this early on, that the Democrats locked out the person who had the organic momentum and who wasn't the establishment insider, and the Republicans didn't. The Republicans let people have their choice, for better or for worse. They didn't strategically play to get their preferred establishment candidate there. They actually played the game in such a way so that Trump, actually being the most popular choice of all the individuals, made it through. He had, I think the term is a plurality of the support. He had the most support of any of the individual guys. And he was obviously where the energy was. And obviously, he ended up winning. So the people, supported him to a certain degree. Not only was Hillary Clinton corrupt, did she have corrupt influence, but also she, the DNC, kept Bernie Sanders from winning. So after all that, and after 6 months of telling us how corrupt she was, in every which way he could, when it comes down to Hillary Clinton, an establishment, corrupt, sold out to the banksters, globalist sellout of laborers across the globe and of the American people. He chose her and chose to support her over supporting the populist, wanting reform trade, wanting immigration trade, which Bernie Sanders used to support, the same kind of immigration reform that Trump was supporting in theory at the time, understanding the relationship between the labor and the labor pool and labor scarcity and wages and the effects that immigration and trade deals have on that. They were lock and sync, and that's some of the most populist policies, economic policies that exist if you're on that side of the docket for those reasons, for helping laborers, not because you're a racist, anti-immigrant, person or conservative or whatever. Okay, this is better, much clearer. Okay, and I couldn't. I mean, Bernie burned me. Bernie sold out at that point. He made that. Maybe he was sat down by someone, I don't know, but he made the decision at that point that going with Hillary Clinton was the right move, and that's the way he proceeded. And he's changed some of his views, kind of gone, like, he wants to continue to change the conversations on the left, but he's also conceded and given in quite a bit in recent years to both the bad side of populism, so just telling the people what they want to hear with a lot of the woke nonsense we're dealing with right now, but also by giving into the establishment and changing some of those views and policies as well. He didn't support Trump on the trade stuff as much as he should have. He wasn't an advocate for the good that Trump was doing in terms of delivering wage growth for the blue-collar class. Maybe it's just because it was partisan. I don't know if it was partisanship or because in Bernie Sanders' mind, the billionaires are the, scum of the earth. And Trump being a fake billionaire, according to Sanders, I'm sure. So then just a millionaire like Bernie Sanders himself. Trump is a bad. So I guess that's why he couldn't support him. But anyways, he chose not to support him. He chose to support the corrupt dingbat, and that burned me, and it made me realize that I had to look beyond Bernie Sanders for my northern light politically. And so I moved on literally before the election, after the primaries, after that happened. Like, I immediately made that move because I couldn't ignore it. I couldn't justify it in my mind. And so I ended up voting for Gary Johnson, the Libertarian candidate, as I did in 2012. Did it again in 2016. I was in California, so I felt like because of the Electoral College, my vote didn't matter, so I went third party. But I would have, and I said on Facebook at the time, I would have voted for Trump if it was a choice just between those two, and I had to make that choice, and my vote counted directly towards that binary outcome. In 2020, basically the difference between Hillary Clinton and Biden is that Biden is dumber and but might actually work towards some good for people. I think might actually be able to accomplish some good for people. Maybe, I don't know, but the dangers of Biden and the dangers of Bernie Sanders to a certain degree, in the position of the presidency, are what kept me from voting for them, and are what made me vote for Trump, or third party in the previous election. What I mean by this, and why I stopped being a Bernie bro, for reasons more so than just sort of this like corruption issue, which is an issue with politicians generally. So I don't necessarily pick on one politician in particular for being corrupt in the ways that they all are, or like being a liar in the ways that they all are. But I do care about, sorry, where was I going with that? My point was, the two areas in which the president has the most control is the executive branch and regulation, and foreign policy. He's the lead diplomat and the commander-in-chief, leader of the military. So when it comes to how we deal with our countries, how we deal with other countries, and how the executive branch functions efficiently, that is the areas over which the president has the most control. So if you're deciding who should be president, it stands to reason, to me at least, that should be your top criteria, and then other policies that have to do more so with Congress making new laws or changing laws, that is how you vote for your Congress people. But you don't really care about that nearly as much in your president, even though they can kind of guide, and obviously Trump worked towards certain ends, and he can have some influence, but it's very limited. So I care much more about those areas of direct control when picking president. So that's why Biden is particularly weak on those two issues, and why Bernie Sanders is also weak on those two issues, in my opinion. He's very, very against having a strong military, at least by my understanding, although he recognizes that our abuses of our military are a problem, and obviously they are. We should never get involved in a war or use that machine for anything other than what is necessary. That doesn't mean that we have low military budgets, or that we don't have a strong military. You have a strong military, and you're just disciplined in how you use it, and moral in how you use it. Another reason why, so there's the foreign policy issue, regulation issue, environmentalism. I'm a tweener. I recognize economic realities, and I try to incorporate them into my views, but I also understand that we have an environment we need to take care of, and that there's considerations on that front. But I also believe that innovation and investment in from the private sector, and technology driven, and innovation, non-technological innovation solutions are the way we solve that problem, as well as a particular tax thing. I made a video on fixing climate change, so check that out. But one of the things that I think Bernie Sanders also split off from Trump on was the 2017 tax bill, because the perception, because of the catchphrase tax cuts for the rich, the perception of the 2017 tax bill is that it only helped the rich, but it didn't help the poor, and it was tax cuts for the rich. The normal left-wing oversimplification to avoid talking about specifics in economics, because they either don't care to learn about it, or they think you're somehow evil for caring about it, even though every single one of them individually obviously cares about their own finances very much and believes in a living wage. So obviously for laborers, they care about greed, and the other side of greed is just self-sufficiency, living, and also like wanting to be productive and wanting to win, wanting to be successful. It's all, tied up in the same thing, and we need to let go of the judgments surrounding all that. But anyways, their perception is wrong for multiple reasons. One, the corporate income tax should be 0, because corporations aren't people, contrary to the Citizens United decision, which allows corporations to play a role in politics they really shouldn't, I don't think. But there's a lot of, that's a very complex issue, but obviously we want to make it, that's a complex issue, money in politics, but we need to understand that if we're voting in the right people, that doesn't matter. None of that matters if we're voting in the right people. And if we make it so that you can't take jobs after you take public office and that you have to sort of sacrifice your future career to that pension and then you just work as a volunteer, we should do that. We should absolutely do that, so that only people that are of retirement age, independently wealthy, and don't care about working in that private sector anymore, or who can just who can take that great government pension and just live off of it, which is, you know, you're making 6 figures on a government pension as a former congressperson, you're sitting fine. You can retire off of that and just live your life, you know, as a public servant. So there's going to be motivation to do that anyways. Anywho, tax cuts for the rich. So the 2017 tax bill not only reduced the corporate income tax from well above all of the European countries, which Bernie Sanders is such a fan of. Oh, by the way, they're not Democrat socialist countries. They are highly capitalist countries with welfare systems that are effective. And they're smaller countries, which creates a much more concrete, crystallized bond, because you know each other and you guys can have, you know, less people can have a more uniform identity. The bigger the population, the more difficult it becomes to have, some commonalities with so many people. The culture tends to become more diverse the bigger you get, because you just, you know, that's the way it works. Makes sense. Anywho, also the opportunity zones, which opened up and directed investment. It made it so that if you invested for more than 10 years in areas that didn't get any investment or very little investment, and the governors could designate these areas as opportunity zones, that drove a whole bunch of investment into the most economically deprived areas, which created this bottom-up effect with wages, which created huge wage surges and started to reverse economic inequality in America. One of our most fundamental problems in the United States and globally is economic inequality. It breeds instability. The Gini coefficient breeds instability. It's just the way it works, seemingly, with human systems. Anyways, and I think that's about it for the tax bill. Anyways, the point is, by reducing the corporate income tax, multinational corporations and multinational investors that are looking to invest, if you make it so that you get the greatest return on investment / have the lowest cost of doing business, which a corporate income tax obviously affects, that's where the investment goes, which is why we had a very investment heavy boom after that tax bill went through. And then after that, we started to see this labor scarcity take effect, and you saw wage growth because of labor scarcity that didn't necessarily correlate to higher GDP. But if you take the metric of per point of GDP, how much wage growth and job growth are you getting out of that, we saw gains on that metric, which is very impressive. So, and we saw stability and growth achieved. So the point is, Bernie Sanders is a great man for many reasons, and he's old. He's Grandpa Bernie. He can go on and live his life. I'm not trying to hold a grudge against the guy, but he should not be your Northern Star for politics, and he has very, very major limitations in his analysis and his political views, and at this point in his integrity. I'm not a Bernie bro anymore. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you enjoyed this story. Please like and subscribe, share, and come back here tomorrow for something else. Peace.